everyone, welcome to Slice of Life. My name is Dabney. I'm the young adult librarian at the Twin Lakes Library System, and I use they, them pronouns. Today I'm going to be talking to you all about myths and fairy tales in movies. And then next week, Abby's going to be continuing this series, and she's going to tell you about myths and fairy tales in TV shows. But I'm going to be talking about 4 movies today: The Hunger Games, the Percy Jackson films, Thor, and Into the Woods. So if you don't know a lot about mythology and fairy tales, that is totally fine. This is kind of a jumping off point. If you know all about it, then, maybe stick around because you might learn something. But anyways, when I was in high school, I was very much into mythology and fairy tales and folk tales and sort of reading a lot of like the classics and then reading works about the classics. So at the time I was reading a lot of things that were more like European myths and folk tales. I really love Norse mythology. And of course, I eventually became an English major in college, so I had a lot of, courses learning about like Greek and Roman mythology, because that ends up being in a lot of Western literature. But anyways, yes, that was something I was interested in. I really liked reading fairy tales and folk tales and kind of learning more about, why those things are so common across different cultures and that sort of thing. All that to say, I'm excited about talking to y'all about this today. But first off, we'll talk about The Hunger Games. So if you haven't read the books, it's a trilogy by Suzanne Collins, and I'll have some information in the notes about where you can check out the books if you want to read them. And then also we have the movies. There's 4 movies in our library that you can now check out through the drive-thru. And when I was preparing this, I didn't actually know that Suzanne Collins based her story on mythology. Basically, The Hunger Games is set in a country called Panem. It is divided into these districts. Each district kind of has a specialty like farming or fishing or mining, and they are producing things for the overall economy. And then you've got the people who live in the capital, and they are like the elite. They're very wealthy. They don't really contribute anything. They're just sort of living lives of luxury and pleasure on the backs of all these people who are working and often living in very poor conditions in the districts. And to maintain control of the people in the districts, what the capital does is they host the annual Hunger Games, where they recruit a boy and a girl from each district, and they put them in this competition to battle to the death. So these kids are forced to kill each other. They are forced to survive in like environments that are, kind of hostile. Like, they're trying to find food to eat and shelter and clothes. And then there's also like, traps built into this place where they're competing, and just like hazards and all. It's like really, really terrible. And when I was reading that, like, I didn't know that this was based on anything, but Suzanne Collins said that she had the idea from like Greek mythology and the story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. So in this myth, the king of Crete, his son goes to Athens and is killed, and in retribution, what the king of Crete does is he demands that, I think it's every year, maybe. Anyways, he demands that they send 7 girls and 7 guys to Crete, and then these youths are placed in the labyrinth to be killed and devoured by the Minotaur, who is a monster who is half human and half bull. And so that's kind of how Crete is displaying their dominance over Athens and like trying to keep them in line, like this is how we're punishing you. So the Hunger Games, they've got kind of a similar thing going on. And then the other influence that she had was Roman gladiator fights. So in ancient Rome, they had the Colosseum, which I've actually been to. It's huge. So kind of imagine like if you're at a professional football arena and you've got all the people in the stands, and instead of being there to watch a football game, what they're doing is watching gladiators like fight to the death, or gladiators fight lions, or all these terrible things that they're putting these people through, and it's all for entertainment. So Suzanne Collins was saying, from the gladiator battles, she kind of used those ideas to build the Hunger Games competition, because what you have is like a powerful and kind of cruel government who is like making these battles happen. You've got the fight to the death battles, and then you've also got the whole thing pitched to the people as entertainment. So in the Hunger Games, everything is being recorded and it's being broadcast to people as entertainment. Obviously the people in the capital are like loving it and thinking it's great fun, while the people in the district are having to watch their kids like battle and die, and it's not fun for them. So yeah, that's kind of a grisly start to our talk, but again, something I didn't know about the Hunger Games when I first read them, so it's interesting. And next up, going also in the tradition of Greek and Roman myths, is the Percy Jackson movie. So there's two, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters, which are based on the first two Percy Jackson books by Rick Riordan. I think I've said this before when I did a book talk on Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. A lot of fans of the books are not really fans of the movies because of the adaptation, but we'll put that aside for now. There is a new TV series in the works that I think people are excited about. But anyways, all of the Percy Jackson movies and books, the characters, a lot of them are gods and goddesses and heroes from Greek and Roman myths. So I feel like, Rick Riordan does a really good job of like remixing these classic characters and tales and making them just like really fun and entertaining. And also, like when I was reading them, you've got these different characters who, in the original myths, they seem like, oh my gosh, like really awesome and powerful and scary. And then Rick Riordan kind of like picks out those character flaws within like the different gods or goddesses and really emphasizes them. And, they kind of become like more ridiculous, I guess. But anyways, it's really good. I could spend a long time, I guess, picking apart like all the different myths and things that are referenced, but we would be here for a really long time. So I would just recommend, I'm going to have like some resources you can check out to learn more about that, including like this video series on Kanopy, which is one of the streaming services like we offer access to. They have like a whole series about myths around the world, and I'm really excited to check it out because a lot of my education was more in like European, Mediterranean like myths and legends, and this goes like all over the world. Asia and Africa and South America and North America. So yeah, I'm really excited to learn about some like global myths and things. But of course, they do have videos about Greek and Roman myths. So if you are a Percy Jackson enthusiast, check those out. And then my next movie is talking about Thor, and I really love the Thor movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because I like Norse mythology, and I thought it was really cool to see how they like reinterpret those myths. And I think one of the biggest things you'll notice right off the bat, if you know anything about Norse mythology, is that the movie version of Thor is not very much like canon Norse mythology Thor. In the myths, Thor is kind of a brute, basically. He's not very smart, he's not very kind or empathetic. He's honestly not very much of a hero. He's very strong. I would say he's brave, but kind of like that nothing can defeat me type of bravery. And he does save like Asgard from external threats like the frost giants. But like as a person, he's not somebody who I would necessarily root for. I do feel like Loki gets a better showing in the movies. Loki's probably my favorite. Well, he is my favorite in the Thor movies. In mythology, he's a trickster. He's not, I would say he's not a villain necessarily, even though in the mythology he kind of brings about Ragnarok and the end of Asgard in the world. But I mean, there were reasons. But I think like in the films and in mythology, he is somebody who's very cunning and manipulative and clever and very much a trickster and kind of not really doing things out of the goodness of his heart. Like, okay, you know what, like in mythology, he does things to help out the gods, quite often, but there's always something that's in it for him, even if it's just like his own amusement at watching the gods scramble. There's a really funny story about when Thor's hammer is stolen by the frost giants, and of course everybody thinks like Loki stole the hammer, and Loki's like, it was not me this time. And so Thor has to get it back, and the only way they can get the hammer back is the frost giant, like the king of the frost giants is like, oh, I'll marry, I can't remember who it is. If it was like Odin's wife, it was somebody. He's like, if I'll marry her and then I'll give Thor's hammer back. And so obviously, like the lady was like, no, it is not happening. And Loki's like, well, I have an idea. So Thor and Loki go to the frost giants, and Thor is undercover, disguised as this woman, and he's got on like the full wedding dress and wedding veil, and Loki is loving it. He thinks this is the funniest thing of all time, and kind of just like provoking Thor more and more. And Thor, of course, is getting more and more angry as this goes on, and kind of goes into a Thor fit at the end after he gets his hammer back. But anyways, that's a tale I really like, and kind of demonstrates how different mythology Thor is from movie Thor, and kind of how similar Loki still remains to be. But I will have, again, more resources if you want to check out some Norse myths and retellings. And then finally, Into the Woods. This is a musical based, I think it was like a Broadway musical, and they made a movie of it. So if you like musicals, I would say check it out. And it kind of has different fairy tale stories in it. Little Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, Rapunzel, and Cinderella. And what I liked about it is, I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with these stories, like even if all we know about them is we've seen like the Disney, classic Disney movies about them, or we kind of get bombarded with these stories again and again. And Into the Woods, I think, gives it a more human face. Like these people actually feel like real people instead of just these kind of archetype or stereotypes or tropes that we're all aware of. They kind of have like more of that human element. Like we get to know more about their motivations and what kind of desires they have. And I really appreciated it. I thought it was really good, and you can watch this one on Hoopla, by the way. And yeah, I don't know. Fairy tales they're always interesting to me, and if you kind of read like the Grimm brothers like fairy tales, I don't know. It's not like reading a novel or a short story. They do, like, the characters do feel kind of like, I don't know, kind of like cardboardy stereotypes of like, okay, here's the dashing prince, and okay, here's the princess who, for whatever reason, she's gorgeous and also cursed and things, and yeah. But they're still interesting. I think myths and fairy tales just kind of tap into the sort of like almost universal themes that humans all kind of deal with. And I've always really liked creation myths and sort of finding out about how ancient cultures and people, like how they explain the world and things that were happening to them. I don't know. It's just very fascinating. And the great thing about that is, you can always keep learning. Like, I just found out today about this new documentary series that I had not known existed, and so I'm very excited to check that out. And yeah, hopefully you will as well. And I totally forgot to tell you your activation code because I am really excited about myths. But your activation code for this is Wicked, so write that down, put this into Beanstack, and get your ticket. Yeah, I hope you all have a great weekend and happy 4th of July. All right, bye everyone.